My wife engaged in an extramarital relationship with my stepfather with the objective of acquiring $1 million. The mansion, which I had assumed was my own, was, in fact, my wife's. I was in a state of considerable distress, and I felt so ashamed that I was unable to admit my situation. I was experiencing a profound sense of embarrassment and humiliation. How could I possibly describe my wife's infidelity to me, her husband of 7 years, without feeling further shame? She had been unfaithful to me with my stepfather. I was 38 years old and married to a woman named Saya, who was 38 years old and 5 years my junior. Our relationship has been relatively stable, with periods of both positive and negative experiences. The negative experiences were largely due to my wife's perception that I was overly attached to my mother. She even referred to me as a mama's boy. I do not intend to defend this perception, as my mother is no longer alive. She passed away 2 years ago. I am grateful that I was able to love her in the way she deserved. She was a single parent to me until I was 10 years old. My mother single-handedly raised me and provided me with the best of everything she could afford, even beyond her means. My mother was a single parent to me until 10 years ago, when she met Andrew. Andrew was a divorcee in his early 50s when he married my mother. I am unsure of what my mother saw in Andrew that led her to marry him after being single for 2 decades. Andrew was not when my mother was alive. I would visit her twice a week. However, my interactions with Andrew were limited to mere formalities and a smile. I was unable to accept him as a father figure, yet I never expressed this to my mother. I was content that she had a companion in him. In the final days of her life and following her demise, there was no question of Andrew's continued presence in my life. I did not even meet him after my mother's funeral, despite the fact that he was still residing in my mother's house. However, his actions towards my wife caused me concern. The embrace was not one of friendship or respect, but rather an intimate gesture that conveyed a certain chemistry between the two individuals. Additionally, the dynamic between my stepfather and I, as well as my sister and her stepfather, was complex. Consequently, witnessing such a display of affection between them was particularly disconcerting. I found the situation to be highly discomforting. I was in my vehicle and they were seated in a roadside cafe. I had departed from my office earlier that day to meet with an acquaintance. The location where I observed them was distant from my residence and even my office. I typically do not frequent that area. I had gone to meet with my acquaintance, but I was distracted. My friend frequently inquired about my well-being, prompting me to inform him that I was merely preoccupied with impending work obligations. I considered the best way to convey what I had observed on my way home. I ultimately decided to return home and confront her about it. I informed her that I had seen her with Andrew. She appeared visibly distressed and was unable to respond. She eventually uttered a single word in response, "Yeah. I met him for lunch." I inquired as to why she had suddenly become so distant. She replied that she had merely bumped into him, and that he had then invited her to have lunch together. As I was staring at her, she understood that I had seen something which I shouldn't have. She informed me that my stepfather was upset about losing my mother. I was attempting to console him. To console him, the elderly gentleman is lonely and has no one to talk to. This is why he held my hands while expressing his grief. I did not inform her that I had observed him holding her hands. I also saw him wrapping his arms around her. Furthermore, the way they were talking did not suggest that he was sad or mourning. "Mom," I observed that their body language was flirtatious, yet they were not laughing. I did not voice my concerns, but I did not accept her explanation. I decided to investigate the matter further before engaging in a confrontation. Saya is a nail artist at a beauty salon, so she works on weekends and is off on weekdays. This issue had been a source of contention between us until recently, when Saya was preoccupied with her work. We engaged in frequent arguments about this matter, and she was not allocating sufficient time to our relationship. She asserted that I was being overly needy following the death of my mother, and that I would visit my mother twice a week, so her assertion that my absence was of no consequence is misguided. In fact, I would visit my mother on weekends and on those occasions when Saya had work on her off days. I would always ensure to return home on time to spend time with her. Previously, she would fight that I was a mama's boy. She was asserting that I was overly dependent on her, despite the circumstances. I observed her with my stepfather, which further enraged me. A few weeks later, it was Thanksgiving. I am referring to the last Thanksgiving, which just occurred. She insisted that we invite Andrew. I was surprised by her direct suggestion. She stated that Andrew was living alone and had no one, so as an extended family, we should invite him. I informed her that she never invited them when my mother was alive. She responded that they had each other to celebrate the evening, and now that poor old man was alone. Ultimately, I relented. I was interested in observing their behavior in my presence. I will not say that they were normal, given the circumstances, but they did not engage in any actions that would have aroused suspicion had I not been aware of the truth. I remained silent for the majority of the time. I had never been particularly fond of him, and my suspicions about his mere presence evoked feelings of resentment within me. I sensed that he was aware of my disinclination towards him. The dinner was marked by an overall sense of awkwardness, with both of us eating in silence and Celia attempting to break the silence with a topic that was, at best, inane. In response, we both offered her a smile that was, at best, insincere. It was becoming increasingly challenging for me to maintain my composure. With a heavy heart, I thus devised a plan. I considered checking her phone, but that proved ineffective as her phone was locked. I was reluctant to inquire about the password, as she would likely become alert to my actions. I thus devised another plan, informing CIA that I would be on the day I departed for an out-of-town business engagement. I left my residence in the early morning and proceeded to my place of work in a normal manner. However, prior to this, I had surreptitiously installed a GPS tracking device in Celia's vehicle, which I was monitoring remotely. I was intending to intercept her and expose her misdeeds. I was concerned that if I arrived and discovered them engaged in idle conversation, it would appear foolish. Therefore, I sought assistance from my colleague Keith. I informed him of my suspicions and requested his presence at Andrew's residence. This was a meticulously devised plan. I instructed him to record any incriminating evidence he might find. I was concerned that Andrew might react adversely to any unusual behavior on my part, so I took the precaution of password protecting the house lock. I also hoped that Andrew would not change the PIN. Keith expressed concern that Andrew might suspect him of entering the house without permission. I advised him to simply say that the front door was open and that he was there to check on Andrew. However, the main door was not open. In the living area, there was a small passage that led to the living room. Therefore, there was no one who would suspect him of unlocking the door. After much persuasion, he agreed to enter the house. However, he was unable to locate them in the hallway. He then proceeded to peer inside the bedroom with his phone camera activated. He had kept the phone in his shirt pocket with a camera protruding from it, thus preventing any suspicion. He observed that the two were without clothing and engaged in a physical embrace. He then expressed his regret and departed the premises before they could react. Andrew followed him outside and inquired as to his purpose. Keith replied that he had merely been there to check on him, but that it was not necessary for him to remain. He then proceeded to leave the area. He stated that he was merely there to check on him, but that it was fine, he would come later. He then sat inside his car and drove off before any confrontation with Andrew or Celia. However, I must inform you that my friend is rather foolish. Instead of opening the rear camera, he opened the front camera the entire time, and nothing was recorded except Andrew and Celia were engaged in a heated exchange with Keith upon his unexpected appearance. I had already prepared 2 sets of clothes and my toiletries before leaving the house that day, so I went to Keith's house. His wife was out of town at her parents' house, so he insisted that I stay with him. Until the situation was resolved, Celia was aware that Keith would have informed me of the truth. She sent me a message inquiring about my return date. I did not respond. I have effectively avoided communication with her. She has been sending me numerous messages and calls, but I have not replied. She believes I am away on business. This incident occurred 4 days ago. I have contacted A. I have virtually no desire to see her face ever again. I will serve her with divorce papers and evict her from my house. Update 1. It took 10 days for the lawyer to send the divorce papers. CIA was not prepared to sign the papers and wanted a discussion. My lawyer suggested that we go for an out-of-court settlement if possible because that would substantially reduce our time and money. It would be preferable to reach a court settlement, as this would considerably reduce the time and financial costs. As a salesperson with a regular job, I have a defined budget for legal fees and limited time to attend court proceedings. I therefore agreed to a meeting with my lawyer present, but when I attended, the other party insisted on a private conversation. I initially resisted, but my lawyer advised me to agree to the meeting, but not to make any commitments. He demanded that he establish a specific framework to maintain the integrity of the meeting, stipulating that there should be no physical contact, no displays of affection, and no admissions of guilt. I found her presence revolting. She attempted to embrace me, but I repelled her. She attempted to justify her actions by claiming that it was a misunderstanding. However, given my familiarity with the prevalence of infidelity narratives on Reddit, I was able to discern the truth. She attempted to portray herself as a benevolent figure who was attempting to assist a lonely individual. However, Keith's account was corroborated, and she was unable to deny it. However, it was only physical contact in the form of cuddling, which did not extend beyond the boundaries of clothing. This was insufficient for her purposes. What she said next was particularly astonishing. She stated that she had initiated physical contact with the intention of safeguarding our future. This was perplexing, as she had previously indicated that her mother had left her considerable wealth to Andrew. Consequently, if he were to marry another woman, she would be entitled to that wealth and her family's property would be transferred to someone else. I responded by suggesting that her desire to become my stepmother was driven by her desire to gain access to my stepfather's wealth. One might observe the intricate dynamics within this family. I was overwhelmed by my mother's incessant chatter, prompting me to abruptly depart from the meeting room. Upon my return, I informed my lawyer of the details of the conversation. He initially appeared disconcerted, but he was genuinely interested in learning about the inheritance my mother had left. She had bequeathed a house that she had inherited from her uncle. It was a substantial property, beyond my financial means. Interestingly, my mother had always expressed an interest in that particular house. After our marriage, she even insisted that we move into the house. I was initially pleased that my mother wanted to move in with me, but my wife, Celia, was adamant that my mother should move out to my apartment. We eventually took up residence in the house, but I refused to allow my mother to move in with us. The house in question was a substantial inheritance from her uncle. It was beyond my financial means. Interestingly, Celia had consistently expressed an interest in that particular mansion. After our marriage, she even insisted that we move into the mansion. I was pleased that CIA wanted to move in with my mother, but Celia was adamant that my mother should move out to my apartment. We eventually took up residence in the mansion, but I denied it. Celia asserted that the house was rightfully hers, as she was the only child of my mother. She further argued that it would be unjust for her to leave the house, given that it would ultimately come to her. This led to frequent arguments between us, as I was unwilling to concede the house to her. One day, I fabricated a story about my mother's will, stating that she had bequeathed the house to Andrew. This lie came at a significant cost, as it led to a rift between us. Celia then turned her attention to my stepfather, hoping to gain possession of the house. The house in question was another piece of information that Celia was unaware of following her mother's demise. I did not transfer the ownership of the house to my name. Instead, I wanted Andrew to live there until he was ready to move out. By transferring it to my name, it would have made it seem as though he was living in my property, which I was sure he would not have liked. Furthermore, the name transfer was expensive, and I was running short of funds at the time. During that period, I lacked the financial resources to transfer the ownership of the house. I was relieved not to have done so, as the CIA would have been entitled to a portion of the property during our divorce proceedings. Alternatively, the CIA may not have permitted Andrew to reside in the house. I am uncertain about the latter possibility, but a cheater is always a cheater in any situation. My mother had willed the house to me, but the CIA was unaware of this. Celia wanted me to have the house, but the CIA did not know this. Second thoughts about the divorce, she proposed that she would soon persuade Andrew to gift her that house. She suggested that if I did not divorce her, the mansion would be ours. I rejected her proposal and said, "No, thank you for the offer. Good luck with your mansion." She responded with a smirk and said, "You are losing a lot by this divorce." I smiled and said, "I don't care." I am uncertain if she was genuinely concerned about the outcome of the divorce. Was she genuinely unintelligent, or was she merely feigning ignorance to avoid personal embarrassment? Regardless, I was aware that she was aware of the limited financial resources I possessed, with the majority of our joint savings account being divided between us. Following the divorce, I experienced a profound sense of relief. At any moment, Celia might become aware of the true ownership of the mansion, which would my mother never divorced me, and I am unable to share her inheritance with that woman. She made a foolish decision by confessing her intentions behind dating Andrew because I was going to use that information against her to drive Andrew away from her life. I observed Andrew picking her up from the courthouse and assisting her with all legal matters during our divorce proceedings. I was simply waiting for the divorce to be finalized. To be over to burst her bubble and then see her reaction. Now that it is done, the next step is to destroy my love. CIA Update 2. After my divorce was finalized, I texted the details of CIA's confession to Andrew. He responded, "You know that your mom will dismanian to you." I confirmed, "Yeah, I have her will, but CIA doesn't know, and she is going to ask you to." I advised Andrew to transfer ownership of the mansion to Silly. I felt that I was not serving his interests by disclosing the truth. My sole intention was to dissuade Silly from pursuing this course of action. She was under the impression that she would inherit the property. Andrew informed me that Saya had recently inquired about his will and the distribution of his assets. However, he was unable to comprehend her motives, as he lacked the necessary financial resources. Andrew did not possess any wealth. I was disinclined to engage in a bro code with him, so I terminated the conversation in a written note. A short while later, I received a telephone call from Saya. In the past, I would not have responded to such a call, but this time I did so because I was aware of the nature of the call. She was shouting from the other end of the line, demanding to know why I had not informed her that my mother had willed the house to me. I was taken aback. This individual's actions were detrimental to the safeguarding of my property and my well-being. Instead, I was subjected to verbal abuse. I found myself laughing at her because it was coming from a place of hurt. I thanked her for her assistance and wished her the best of luck with her elk and game. I terminated the call and blocked her number a few days later. She called me again from an unknown number, possibly from her friends or colleagues. Informed me that Andrew had terminated the relationship. He discovered that she was with him solely for the inheritance, and when the truth came to light, he terminated the relationship. He accused her of being greedy and said that she was attempting to assist him in coping with loneliness. However, he turned against her. I am uncertain as to why she was still attempting to maintain a positive image. She presented herself as a pious woman, despite the fact that her truth had already come out. I replied in a sarcastic tone, stating that she had selflessly helped others, but that her underlying intention was unclear. She said that she had been with Andrew for my sake, in order to gain the mansion for me. However, she was now saying that she had been trying to help Andrew cope with the loss and loneliness. It is remarkable that she did not abandon her efforts to contact me. She employed a variety of tactics to try to persuade me to reconcile, including gaslighting. She even showed up at my house, my office, and at various public places I frequented. It is particularly noteworthy that she appeared at my gym and attempted to corner me to speak with me. The situation was a nightmare, yet I chose to ignore her as if she were a stranger to me. Technically, she was a stranger because our divorce was final. Update 3. I had assumed that this matter was resolved, but my past resurfaced as soon as I transferred ownership of the mansion to my name. I am uncertain of her motivation for pursuing the house. I believe that the value of the mansion, estimated at $1 million, may have played a role in her actions. The transfer of the mansion to my name was completed 6 months after my divorce. I had initially considered this course of action, as I had written previously, but had not proceeded with it until now. This was due to a lack of savings to spare for the transfer. However, following my divorce and a reduction in my expenses, I was able to save the requisite sum in 4 to 5 months. Prior to initiating the transfer, I informed Andrew of my intention. He was no longer residing in the house, however, and had already begun the process of removing his belongings. He agreed to this, and I became the administrator of the locking system. The necessary paperwork was prepared over the course of several months, and during this period, I had the lawn and pool cleaned, as they had not been maintained for an extended period. I was not in contact with Saya, but according to our last conversation, Andrew had also broken up with her. I was perplexed when she showed up at the mansion during one of the cleaning days, as I was not present. The cleaning manager informed me that a woman had come down and was roaming around in the house. I attempted to prevent her from entering, but she informed them that she was my wife. While this may have been true, the way she was behaving suggested that she was a trespasser. Indeed, she was, and I instructed them to remove her from the premises. They did as instructed and then contacted me to confirm that she had left. When she did show up at my house, I informed her that she was not welcome there. She wailed that I had abandoned her when she had done no wrong and that her intentions were pure. I informed her that she should seek therapy and that she needed to check out a mental hospital instead of my house. She demanded that I let her inside the house and have a conversation, but I refused. I closed the door in her face. She was indeed outside, and I informed them to kick her out. They did as I requested, and I confirmed the situation. The woman was no longer present at the residence. It was not difficult to predict that she would reappear at my house. Indeed, she did so, crying and wailing that I had abandoned her when she had done no wrong and that her intentions were pure. I informed her that she should seek therapy and that she needed to check out a mental hospital instead of my house. She requested that I let her inside the house and have a conversation, but I declined. I closed the door on her face. Furthermore, a restraining order was issued against Saya on the grounds of my property. The probability of her gaining access to the premises or causing damage was low, given that she had not yet resorted to violence. Nevertheless, I was compelled to take this action in order to safeguard the interests of the new tenants of the house. I had no desire for Celia to cause them any inconvenience. The situation had been relatively stable until that point, and I hoped that I would not have to provide any further updates on this matter. I am currently writing the final chapter of the story about Celia. I have now reached the point where I can move on with my life. I will now proceed to the next story. In the second story, the protagonist hooked up with a random girl on Tinder. It turned out that she was my professor's wife. I am a typical university student, just trying to get through finals week. Tonight, after a very stressful day of exams and studying for my ancient literature class, I decided to casually scroll Tinder. It had been a while, and I just needed to decompress. I had not anticipated that this would result in further distress. I swiped right on a woman who was less than a mile away. She was 25 years of age, slightly older than me, but she was extremely attractive, and she seemed interested in me. I decided to proceed. She invited me to her apartment, saying that she would be back in 20 minutes. I was eager to get started, and we began immediately. However, approximately 3 minutes after we began, we heard the front door opened, and she instructed me to cease. I complied, and we listened. The footsteps approached from our direction, and I became visibly distressed. I anticipated a similar outcome to that of my parents' discovery of my former romantic partner. Instead, the elderly professor, whom I deeply disliked and was studying for a test, entered the room and froze. He saw her, gasped, and then observed my face. His face turned red, and he screamed, "Get out of my house." I believe I may have lost some of my hearing from the volume of his voice. I put on my shorts and ran back to my quad. Now, as I lie in bed, I am consumed by thoughts of my college professor seeing me naked, not just naked but engaged in a sexual act with his daughter without any clothes at all. He already disliked me, and he is a very tough grader. I know that I am going to fail this final and ruin my GPA. I see him tomorrow at 11 o'clock. 0:0 a.m. I would appreciate your good wishes and will provide an update on the outcome of the examination. I have taken the examination, but I am still uncertain about the situation. I will redact all personal information because this incident has had a much greater impact than I had anticipated. I would prefer to avoid a school-wide scandal. I entered the examination room with trepidation, hoping that my life would not be ruined by this professor. Fortunately, the teaching assistant entered the room and informed me that the professor was unable to proctor the examination due to a family emergency. He will email me the results of the examination. By the end of Saturday, the TA had commenced distribution of the tests. Upon approaching me, she gave me a peculiar look and laughed before handing me the exam. I surmised that the administration was likely already aware. I completed the test and, to my surprise, I believe I performed quite well. Upon exiting the room, I promptly checked my email. I have a routine of checking my emails after every exam. I found an email from Professor Name. The email was from a non-academic account and did not include any identifying information. 0.0. We will discuss our situation and how to proceed. I appreciate your understanding and cooperation. Professor Name. I am uncertain about the best course of action. I did not do anything wrong. I am unaware of the circumstances that led to his wife becoming involved. There was verbal and written consent. I can provide the Tinder DM history as evidence if necessary. His daughter has an IUD, so there is no possibility of pregnancy. The primary concern is the potential impact on my relationship with the professors and the administration. I will provide an update tomorrow after the meeting. Edit. After reading comments suggesting that it might be his wife, his reaction in the meeting makes a lot of sense. She never mentioned her relationship with him. However, I still hope that this is not the case and that he was simply terrified by the thought of being his future son-in-law. In-law update. As some of you requested an update, I will provide one. Over the last couple of hours, I have experienced a shift in my emotional state. Initially, I was terrified of being sued. However, I have since considered the possibility that I might become a school legend. Unfortunately, a few of my friends found my Reddit post. Because of the class name and my professor's absence, they know exactly what happened. Here is the update. Right after making the last post, I received an email stating that the meeting had been changed. Everyone involved was supposed to meet a little later in a noise-proof room. They did not want anyone else to hear or get involved. We met at around 2, at the 30-minute mark, the professor and the Dean of Academic Affairs sat across from me, as many of you had predicted. His wife, the daughter I had previously been intimate with, walked in with a ring. Fortunately, she and the professor did not attempt to make any claims regarding malicious intent or a lack of integrity. The meeting was relatively quiet and straightforward. 2 other professors would have evaluated the class exams instead of the professor's name to ensure fairness. Under the student handbook states that if a professor has an issue with a student, they must submit all previous exam materials to the administration for evaluation. It is likely that this is common knowledge, but I have been placed in another professor's class next semester by the scheduling office. I am aware that the meeting went as well as it could, but my situation is far from ideal because my friends have found the posts and have informed a significant portion of our friend group about our casual Tinder hookups.